Everyone in the galaxy remembers the night humanity made its choice. The night every species watched in disbelief as we stepped forward, alone, and rewrote the fate of 100,000 condemned children, because when they voted to erase those orphans from existence, we didn't hesitate. We stood and said, "We'll take them all. If you believe in humanity's courage, in its impossible compassion, then subscribe, because tonight, you witnessed the moment that changed everything." The silence before the Voteth chamber of the Galactic Welfare Assembly was so quiet that even the air seemed afraid to move. 91 species gathered beneath a vaulted ceiling of dark metal and polished starlight, each ambassador seated in their sector rings, their faces illuminated by the slow rotation of the holographic briefing. And at the center floated the projection, 100,000 genetically engineered children, illegally made, ownerless, considered property of a dissolved regime, born to a fallen empire that no longer existed. Their creators were gone. Their world was dust. Their future was unassigned. The committee's proposal was simple and horrifying, immediate and complete termination. The screens didn't call it that. No, bureaucracy never does. They used prettier words: humane discontinuation, resource-based resolution, minimization of burden. But every species in that chamber knew what it meant. The children would die, efficiently, quietly, without fuss, because orphaned life, in the galaxy's eyes, was expensive. I watched, from the press gallery above, surrounded by diplomats, aides, and observers. The human delegation sat near the lower center, 3 representatives, 1 flag, and no voice yet invited to speak. The debate had raged for hours. The Korthan were first to argue. Forced survival is cruelty, they declared, their chitin gleaming under the lights. Their biology is unstable, their minds uncalibrated, and them now spare them pain. The Oseri followed. With famine on 12 colonies, we cannot sustain additional mouths. Compassion requires realism. Then the Velthari, who always spoke last. "This is not cruelty," they said softly. "It is mercy." Round me, heads nodded. I felt sickness coil in my stomach. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they thought we wouldn't. The children no one wanted. The projection cycled through more details. Genetic completion rate, 91%. Psychological development, unknown. Educational level, inadequate. Primary needs, full support. Estimated cost, beyond calculation. O parent, no home, no place to go. They were made to be soldiers. They were never meant to grow old. I watched the chamber as species after species cast their preliminary votes. It was like watching snow slide off a mountainside. Slow at first, then all at once. Approve, approve, approve. We agree. We too. Yes, yes, yes. Humanity was last, but not because anyone was waiting for us. Because they didn't expect us to matter. The chairwoman's announcement. Chairwoman Ilan rose from her platform. "We have reviewed the majority decision," she said. "With 89% in favor, the directive will..." She never finished, because a voice rose from the hall floor. Human, calm, clear. "Madam Chairwoman," Ambassador Yarrow said, standing. "Earth requests the floor." Gasps rippled, some annoyed, some confused, some alarmed. Chairwoman Ilan blinked, slowly irritated. "Ambassador," she replied, "the vote is concluded." "Our decision, respectfully," Yarrow interrupted. "The Assembly has not heard humanity's position." The chamber fell silent again, not because they cared, but because they were curious. Humans were still new enough to be interesting, strange enough to be unpredictable. The chairwoman hesitated, then relented. "You have 2 minutes." The words that stopped a Galaxy. Yarrow walked toward the center platform, hands folded behind his back. He did not bring notes. He did not consult screens. He spoke from the heart. These children did not choose to be born. He began. They did not choose war, or abandonment, or the suffering of existence. He looked around the hall. No one chooses their beginning. Across from him, species watch with shifting expressions. "We talk of burden," Yarrow continued, "yet we forget what burden truly is. It is not the weight of feeding a child. It is the weight of ignoring them." Silence deepened. "Humanity knows abandonment," he said. "We know hunger. We know tragedy. But we also know this. Compassion is not measured by cost. He took a breath. It is measured by courage. A wave of faint murmurs passed through alien delegates. Then Yarrow spoke the words that would be etched into history. If the Assembly wishes to abandon these children, Earth will not. The chamber stirred. Yarrow lifted his voice. Humanity volunteers custody of all 100,000 orphans. Immediately, permanently, without condition. One declaration, a supernova. The room exploded into chaos. Shock, anger, disbelief. Delegates surged to their lecterns. This is impossible. You lack capacity. You lack infrastructure. You lack resources. The Corthan ambassador hissed, you will drown yourselves. The Oseri demanded, you would endanger your own people. And the Velthari whispered, why would you do this? Yarrow met every eye. Because someone must. He said simply. The emergency hearing procedures halted. Arguments erupted. Legal frameworks strained like glass. 3 hours later, the chairwoman summoned an emergency hearing. With 42 advisors, they questioned Earth relentlessly. Do you understand the cost? Yes. The risk? Yes. The scale? Yes. The time required? Yes. The sacrifices? Yes. Then the chairwoman asked a final question. Ambassador, why? Yarrow exhaled. Because they are children. No. One spoke after that. The final vote. They voted again. This time, carefully, slowly, uneasily. But when the tally appeared, humanity had won, not through persuasion, but through refusal to be silent. Condition of custody, approved. Status of termination, order, revoked. The chamber was stunned. Humanity had just adopted an entire generation, the galaxy deemed disposable. Erevalvi came the following week, a convoy of carrier ships, old and scarred, bearing cargo more fragile than any weapon. We watched. From the spaceport as the first transports touched down, the air shimmered with heat. Engines howled to silence. Then the doors opened. The children stepped out. Some were barely old enough to walk. Some stood like soldiers, trained by fate instead of kindness. Some trembled at every sound. Some stared with hollow eyes because they had spent their entire lives waiting to die. But instead, they found us. Doctors rushed forward first, then social workers, then volunteers. We brought blankets, food, water, medicine. And trust. You cannot imagine the way distrust looks in a child's eyes until you see it soften. The facility at Corrales. Ridge's first sanctuary was built on Corrales Ridge, converted education center overlooking the sea. They expected chaos. We found resilience. They expected violence. We found innocence. They expected impossible need. We found infinite potential. There was crying. Of course, nightmares, shaking hands, silent terror. Healing is slow, but humanity has patience. We learned their names, their fears, their joys, their dreams. Then we let them choose their own futures. You cannot force a child to live. You can only show them why they should want to. The interview. Weeks later, I interviewed Ambassador Yarrow privately. I asked him the question every species was asking. Why did we take responsibility for them? He didn't think long. Because someone taught us. He said, who? I asked, expecting a philosopher or leader. He smiled faintly. A teacher I had when I was 10. He leaned back, remembering. She told us that a civilization is not measured by its weapons or its wealth. He paused. It is measured by how it treats the most vulnerable in its care. His eyes softened, and I realized no one else was willing to try. The galaxy watches. 2 months later, other species began to visit. They wanted to see if the children had survived. They expected failure. They found laughter. They expected despair. They found hope. They expected burden. They found family. We did not fix everything, but we gave them time, and time is the most precious thing a child can have. The ceremonial, the 6-month anniversary of their arrival. The first 1,000 children stood before our flag. They wore uniforms not of war, but of education. Each was given a certificate. Not of service, but of belonging. Welcome, Yarrow told them, to your world. Some cried, some smiled, some stared in awe, but every one of them stood tall, because they were no longer unwanted. No longer alone, no longer forgotten. The message we sent not to the assembly, not to the galaxy, but to ourselves. Humanity does not abandon those who cannot stand. Humanity lifts them, even when it costs us everything, especially when it costs us everything. Because compassion is not weakness. Compassion is defiance. Compassion is strength, and in saving them, we saved something inside ourselves. The legacy centuries from now, the galaxy would speak of that decision. Some would call it reckless, some would call it foolish, but most would call it miraculous, because in a universe of indifference, humanity chose responsibility, humanity chose hope, humanity chose life, and those children, they grew, they learned, they healed. They became explorers, scientists, doctors, artists, parents. And in time, ambassadors. Not of earth, but of compassion. The final line history recorded in the official logbook of the assembly, beneath the ruling, beneath the signatures, beneath the procedural notes. Someone no one knows who wrote a final remark in clear, simple script. Against the darkness, humanity lit a candle. It was enough. It was everything. And it all began with 7 words spoken into silence. We'll take them all. Hey, everyone are still here, still awake. If you are, that's fine. Take a breath, relax. Let's continue. 1. The quiet after the stormed weeks following Earth's acceptance were strange. The galaxy watched us through a lens of dread, suspicion, fascination, and disbelief. Billions tuned in to live feeds from our hospitals, our schools, our social service centers. Not because they wanted us to succeed, but because they were waiting for us to fail. They waited for riots, for outbreaks, for tragedies, for despair. They waited for proof that humanity had bitten off more than it could chew, and quietly, humbly, we began the work, not the grand, sweeping work of speeches, rulings, or declarations, but the quiet labor that forms the foundation of compassion, appointments, vaccinations, therapy, meals, sleep schedules, nightmares. We met every challenge with patience, and gradually, uneasily, the galaxy realized something. Humanity wasn't performing a miracle. We were practicing responsibility. 2. The night convoys in the coastlines of Earth. Ships continued to arrive. Old medical frigates from the United Colonies, retired terraforming barges repurposed for transport, humanitarian cruisers refitted with dormitory pods. Night after night, they came. Sometimes with 50 children, sometimes with 3,000. They arrived confused, frightened, hungry, silent. Many did not understand language not correctly. Some understood only commands. Some understood punishment. Some understood nothing but the cold echo of survival. The first to greet them were always volunteers, people with blankets, people with warm food, people who had rehearsed the phrase, "You're safe now," over and over again, until it became true. 3. The sleep teams. Most species in the galaxy never understood sleep the way humans do. Many do not dream. Many do not rest. Many do not heal through soft darkness. But these children, they needed it. They needed safety in silence, comfort in darkness, trust in routine. So humanity built sleep teams. Thousands of trained caregivers stationed across sanctuaries, hospitals, and learning centers. Their task was simple: sit with them every night, every hour, every panic. Sit beside the trembling children. Sit beside those who woke crying. Sit beside those who stared sleeplessly at ceilings. Sit beside those afraid to close their eyes. No child faced the night alone. Not anymore, for a visit. From the Velthari months after Earth assumed guardianship, the Velthari arrived in orbit, the very species that had once insisted on merciful extinction. Their ships were ornate and crystalline, glittering like frozen rivers caught in moonlight. Crowds gathered as their delegation descended into the atmosphere. They expected to witness chaos. Instead, they found order, not perfect, not polished. But functional. One delegate, a somber woman named Sarai, toured Corrales Ridge personally. She observed children tracing letters on slate tablets. She watched caretakers reading bedtime stories. She listened to morning laughter echo down hallways like a soft chorus of renewed existence. She was silent through it all. At the end, she turned to Ambassador Yarrow. "Why do you do this?" She whispered. "Why endure this burden?" Yarrow faced the sea. "It's not a burden," he said. It's a bond. Sarai lowered her head. And for the first time, she understood. 5. The medical reveal in the 117th day. A crisis arrived. 1. No one anticipated. Doctors discovered a hidden genetic flaw in the children's engineered design, a flaw intended for battlefield loyalty and obedience, a flaw that ensured dependence. Their bodies were capable, but their neurological networks lagged years behind natural development. They were physically strong, but emotionally, they were infants. The galaxy panicked. Headlines ignited. Earth adopts defective children. Humanity will collapse under this burden. Termination would have been kinder. Humanity ignored the noise, and we adapted. We didn't surrender to despair. We altered treatment paths. We specialized training. We restructured schedules. And we kept going. Because when a child falls behind, you don't abandon them. You slow down. And hold their hand. 6. Integration. The children began entering schools. Not separate ones. Not hidden ones. Not distant. Isolated centers. Human schools. Human classrooms. Human playgrounds. We taught them languages not by lecture, but through play, song, and presence. We taught them safety not by command, but by patience. We taught them futures not by dictation, but by invitation. Some struggled, some excelled, some froze under pressure, but every one of them grew, a little, then a little more, then more still, one step at a time. 7. The first Wordchee's name was Adrix. He was 6 years old. He had never spoken, not a single word, though his eyes revealed oceans. One evening, after 6 months on Earth, sitting beside a volunteer during sunset, he tapped her arm and quietly whispered, "Home." That was all, a single syllable, quiet, shaking, soft. The volunteer cried silently, because in that one fragile word, she heard everything the galaxy failed to understand. That not sorrow, not fear, but longing. For belonging, and belonging demands courage. 8. The first celebration, the anniversary of their arrival, Earth didn't host a grand ceremony. No parades, no fireworks, no fanfare. Just a night of lights. Soft lanterns, floating on ocean tides across every coastal sanctuary. One lantern released for each child, not as memorials, but as wishes. The sky above Earth glowed like a constellation caught in motion. Every child watched. Some held lanterns of their own. Others leaned against volunteers. Some clapped with joy. Some cried quietly. And in the soft hush of midnight, Yarrow spoke to the gathered children. You were not abandoned, he told them. You were awaited. 9. And then the galaxy shifted slow. One by one, other species followed humanity's example. Not in speech, but in action. The Trilry opened their academies to the brightest orphans. The Corthan offered cybernetic support systems for neurological deficits. The Oseri donated agricultural supplies to Earth's sanctuaries. The Velthari sent empathy counselors, trained in trauma recovery. What began as one planet's impossible burden became an interstellar collaboration. Because compassion is contagious. And hope spreads quietly. 10. The children grow. Years passed. The children became adolescents, then young adults. They studied sciences. They composed symphonies. They learned engineering. They sailed oceans. They mapped stars. They wrote books. Some stumbled, some soared. But not one was forgotten. Humanity kept its promise. No matter cost, no matter complexity, no matter effort, we walked beside them, through every stage, through every fear, through every milestone. 11. The Great Return in the 20th anniversary. The children, now adults, petitioned the Assembly. Not for recognition, not for apology, not for compensation, but for access. Access to the ruins of the world they would have died on, so they could rebuild it. Not as a fortress, but as a foundation, not as revenge, but as renewal. And when the Assembly granted permission, the galaxy held its breath, because something unprecedented happened. The former orphans left Earth, not as refugees, but as pioneers. 12. The Garden Planeth world they inherited was scarred. Cratered, weathered, barren, marks of war etched into its continents, silence echoing through its valleys. But the former children of a failed empire did not despair. They planted, they constructed, They irrigated. They cultivated. They built their first home in a crater that once held weapons factories. And they named it Sanctum Terrae, Sanctuary of Earth. In honor of the planet that taught them compassion. 13. What the galaxy learned decades later. When historians asked, what was humanity's greatest achievement? They did not mention Mars colonization, or faster-than-light travel, or quantum navigation. They said only, we saved 100,000 children no one else wanted. Because technology fades, wealth disperses, empires crumble, but compassion endures and shapes future generations. 14. Legacy. Centuries later, those children told stories to their own grandchildren. Stories of a decision made in silence, a vote cast in cruelty, a future determined by indifference, and the single voice that broke it, humanity. Their descendants whispered the word with reverence, the ones who chose us. And across star systems, a truth endured. Humanity is not remembered for perfection. Humanity is remembered for heart. 15. Final reflection. The galaxy once believed mercy was waste. Now they know mercy is strength, and in the infinite quiet between stars, where darkness waits without pity, humanity's light remains, not because we were obligated, not because we were heroic, but because, when faced with the suffering of abandoned children, we stepped forward and said, we will take them all, and we meant it. Hey, everyone are still here, still awake. If you are, that's fine. Settle in, quietly. Let's return. A world rebuilt from Ashesh. When the children reached adulthood, they stood at a crossroads. Humanity expected them to integrate permanently into Earth society, to choose cities, careers, homes, families. But something unexpected happened. They looked outward instead, toward the silent world of their creation, not with hatred, not with grief, but with longing, a longing to grow roots where their story began. To turn a birthplace of tragedy into a landscape of hope. And so, gently and respectfully, Earth stepped back and let them lead. 2. The first return fleet launched in silence. 30-8 vessels, crewed entirely by the grown orphans, not soldiers, not conquerors. Builders. Teachers. Scientists. Agronomists. Counselors. They named themselves the founding cohort when they entered orbit around their ruined homeworld. The transmissions captured a moment lost to history. They wept. Not for what was destroyed, but for what could finally be rebuilt. 3. Ruins and seedlings. First months on their new world held shock after shock. Entire mountain ranges stripped bare by strip mining reactors. Oceans drained for synthetic compounds. Cities reduced to skeletonized metal. And yet, life fought to return. Mosses clung to abandoned structures. Flowers grew through shattered pavement. Bird-like creatures nested in rusted beams. The former orphans planted the first trees along the broken roads. One child, now grown, kneeling in old dust, pressing a sapling into soil once poisoned by purpose, as though apologizing on behalf of history. 4. The Council of Aitaito avoid the mistakes of their creators. The founding cohort formed a new government. Not a senate, not an aristocracy, not a military hierarchy, a council of 80 volunteers, rotating leadership, no lifetime positions. Decisions by consensus, not decree. Every law required compassion first, logic second, efficiency third. And the very first law they wrote was simple: no child on this world will ever be without a home. Earth received a copy before it was published. Ambassador Yarrow framed it in his office. 5. The first crisis rebuilding was slower than anyone dreamed. The soil resisted cultivation. Infrastructure collapsed under its own weight. Diseases dormant. For decades awakened with vengeance. For a moment, the future seemed fragile. Some argued they should return to Earth, that the dream was impossible, that compassion had limits. But the founding cohort remembered something humanity taught them: you don't turn back. When difficulty arrives, you adjust your pace and keep going. So they did. 6. The letter home. During the darkest week of sickness and exhaustion, Ambassador Yarrow received a message from the cohort. It was short, only 3 sentences. Don't worry, we're not afraid. You taught us how to survive. He read it alone. A witness would later say he cried quietly, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming pride. 7. A garden of names by year 5, the first city was complete. Not towering, not grand, but humble. Open plazas, sprawling gardens, wide pathways, meant for walking, not machinery. In the heart of the city stood a memorial, the Garden of Na Mesa Place, where every one of the 100,000 carried a stone, each stone engraved not with their past, but with their chosen futures. Engineer, teacher, parent, explorer, artist. Not one stone said orphan, because their definition had changed. 8. The children. They just said 24 years after their rescue, something unprecedented happened. The founding cohort adopted their first generation of children, but not from themselves, from across the galaxy. The surrendered, the abandoned, the unwanted, the overlooked, species who once condemned them to death, now entrusted them with fragile life, because compassion had turned into legacy, and legacy had turned into culture. The cohort said, for words humanity once spoke, we will take them. 9. Earth's pilgrim. Soon, humans began traveling to the new world. Not to teach, not to govern. But to learn, because something marvelous had taken root there. A society built not on conquest, but on care. A civilization measured not by might, but by responsibility. The galaxy had seen power. Now it witnessed purpose. 10. A quiet conversation. The 50th anniversary of the original vote. Ambassador Yarrow visited the home world. He walked beside Adrix, no longer the silent boy who spoke his first word at sunset, but now the elected chairperson of the council. As they gazed across a meadow where a city once burned, Yarrow asked, "Have you forgiven them?" Adrix did not answer at once. Then he smiled faintly. There was nothing to forgive. Yarrow frowned. Adrix continued, "They feared what compassion would cost them. They never realized what it would reward." 11. The Second Voteth Galactic Assembly reconvened, not to discuss cost, not to assess burden, but to honor achievement. The vote this time was different. Unanimous. One voice, one purpose. They declared, the children saved by Earth shall be recognized as a sovereign civilization. Not refugees. Not survivors, but citizens of a world born through mercy. Humanity applauded. Quietly. Proudly. Tearfully. 12. Legacy in the stars. Over the next century, dozens of species established child sanctuaries modeled after the cohort, not because of need, but because of inspiration. Compassion was no longer rare. It had become a standard, a measure, an expectation. When future generations faced crisis, they looked back to the moment humanity rose alone and said, "We'll take them all," and realized they could rise too. 13. The last broadcast. When Ambassador Yarrow reached his final days, he recorded a message, not for politicians. Not for historians, for the cohort, for the ones whose lives defined his own. His voice trembled but remained steady. You were called burdens by the galaxy. You were called waste. You were called doomed. But you were none of those things. You were the future, and you proved it. It was his final gift, his final truth, his final lesson. 14. The heirloom. At his passing, the cohort shipped a single object back to Earth, a small stone from the Garden of Names, engraved with one word, gratitude. It sits today in the Hall of Humanity. Under gentle light, where children visit and ask why it matters, and teachers explain what courage looks like. 1-5. The final understanding. Centuries later, historians no longer debated the choice. Economists no longer calculated the cost. Strategists no longer considered the risk, because none of it mattered. What mattered was the life they saved. What mattered was the compassion they ignited. What mattered was the legacy they built. Because humanity learned something eternal. Saving one child may change a life. Saving 100,000 can change a galaxy.